Cheese Wagstaff is one of the easiest people in The Wire to hate. He betrays Proposition Joe, helps Marlowe destroy the East Side organization, takes his reward, and later talks about the whole thing as if he merely changed jobs. The betrayal feels especially ugly because Joe is his uncle. Joe protects Cheese for years, gives him authority, cleans up his mistakes, and keeps trusting him long after other people can see the danger. Cheese still deserves more analysis than the word traitor gives him. His choice grows out of every part of his personality. He wants the status of a leader, the freedom of a soldier, and the protection of a family member at the same time. Joe keeps asking him to control himself. Marlowe sees that frustration and turns it into an opening. By the time Cheese leaves his uncle alone in that house, Marlowe has already learned exactly what kind of reward will move him. If you enjoy character analysis like this, subscribe. There are many people in The Wire whose smallest decisions explain the entire world around them, and Cheese is one of the best examples. Cheese first enters the story in Season 2 as a man collecting a debt from Ziggy Sabatka. That introduction tells us almost everything about the version of power Cheese admires. Ziggy has taken a drug package and failed to return the money. Cheese pulls him from his car, searches him, humiliates him in front of his people, and gives him a deadline. If Cheese is not paid by Friday, Ziggy will be dead by Saturday. He takes Ziggy's Camaro as security and later burns it. The debt is legitimate by the rules of their business. The performance around the debt belongs entirely to Cheese. He needs Ziggy to feel small. He needs the people beside him to laugh. He needs his own name to become the most important fact in the conversation. This pattern follows him through the series. Cheese rarely has quiet authority. He reaches for a threat, a joke, a gun, or an insult so everyone can see him exercising power. Nick Sabatka and Sergei eventually bring the dispute to Proposition Joe. Joe listens, calculates what everybody owes, and forces a settlement. He explains the family problem with his usual dry humor. He has nephews and in-laws causing trouble, and killing them would create an awkward Thanksgiving. The joke is funny because the protection is serious. Joe absorbs inconvenience from Cheese because Cheese belongs to him. That arrangement teaches two very different lessons. Joe believes family creates an obligation to tolerate a relative's failures. Cheese learns that family gives him a permanent layer of insulation. He can turn a small debt into a personal spectacle, destroy property, and threaten a weak outsider. His uncle will arrive later and convert the mess into arithmetic. Cheese receives the protection without developing the patience that makes Joe capable of providing it. The contrast between them is visible immediately. Joe's power comes from resolving problems. Cheese's power comes from making people experience him as a problem. Joe can sit with smugglers, West Side bosses, lawyers, and street dealers because he adjusts his language to the room. Cheese enters nearly every room trying to make the room adjust to him. He is still competent. That matters. A useless nephew could remain in a protected corner of the organization. Cheese becomes one of Joe's lieutenants, controls crews, handles weight, and understands enough discipline to keep business away from his own phone. When the major case unit follows him in Season 3, they spend months struggling to hear his voice. Calls reach people around him, messages move face to face, and the organization stays difficult to penetrate. Cheese has survived in the game for a reason. His weaknesses appear whenever pride enters the situation. The dogfighting story in Season 3 gives Cheese more humanity and makes him harder to excuse. Before the fight, he speaks to his dog with real affection. He calls it his baby, asks who its daddy is, and wagers $25,000 on it. Once the dog loses, Cheese shoots it. Later, the police hear him talking about the killing and mistake his words for a confession to murdering a person. Cheese says he has not slept, keeps seeing the body, and believes he will never find another one like it. The grief sounds genuine. The killing was also his decision. Cheese can love something and still destroy it when it fails the role he assigned to it. His attachment carries ownership inside it. The dog is his baby while it can fight, win money, and reflect strength back at him. Defeat changes the relationship in seconds. Cheese mourns afterward once the consequences belong to him. One scene cannot mechanically predict everything Cheese will later do to Joe. It gives us a useful view of how he handles disappointment. He turns pain into violence, calls the violence necessary, and saves the emotion for later. He never asks how his own judgment placed the thing he loved in danger. The interrogation also proves Cheese has nerve. Once he realizes the police are trying to attach human bodies to his words, he stops playing and asks for a lawyer. He keeps Joe's organization out of his answers and waits the detectives out. Joe later hears that Cheese stood tall. Cheese is capable of loyalty when loyalty protects his identity and position. He follows the code while the code keeps him secure. That detail makes his later betrayal more revealing. Pressure alone cannot explain it. Cheese has already demonstrated his ability to remain silent. His loyalty changes when a stronger organization offers him a better version of himself. For most of Cheese's life, Proposition Joe is the source of everything he has and the ceiling above everything he wants. Joe gives him rank, supply, territory, and a famous organization to stand behind. The same relationship prevents Cheese from ever knowing how much of his reputation belongs to him. Outsiders repeatedly identify him through Joe. The police follow Cheese because he can lead them upward to Proposition Joe. Dealers tolerate him because offending Cheese means creating a problem with Proposition Joe. Even his first major dispute in the series ends when another man carries it to his uncle. Cheese says his own name rings out. The show keeps reminding us whose name gives it volume. Joe also leads in a style Cheese cannot fully respect. He bargains, he compromises. He turns enemies into customers. He creates the New Day Co-op around the belief that reliable supply and shared profit can reduce war. Cheese benefits enormously from this approach. He also experiences it as a constant restriction on the form of masculinity he wants to perform. Joe keeps asking him to think longer. Cheese wants to react now. Joe cares about relationships that preserve future business. Cheese cares about the person who insulted him in the room. Joe can survive appearing weak for a day if the decision produces money for a year. Cheese treats the appearance of weakness as an immediate loss. Omar's robbery of the co-op shipment brings that difference into focus. Joe helped create the opportunity for Omar to rob Marlowe's poker game earlier, and Omar later steals the co-op's entire shipment. Omar offers to sell the drugs back for 20 cents on the dollar. Joe recognizes a way to recover the package, sell it back to the co-op for more, and survive the crisis. Cheese sees the humiliation. A man who has robbed them is setting the terms, and Joe is prepared to do business with him. Joe's response is clever. It also confirms every suspicion Cheese carries about his uncle. Joe will swallow an insult if the numbers work. Cheese would rather make someone bleed and worry about the numbers afterward. From Joe's perspective, that impulse makes his nephew dangerous. From Cheese's perspective, Joe keeps asking him to behave like a subordinate while men such as Omar embarrass them. Marlowe enters that tension with perfect timing. Joe believes Marlowe can be civilized. He brings him into the co-op, gives him access to the best heroin in Baltimore, helps him launder money, introduces him to Maury Levy, and gradually teaches him how power survives beyond a corner. Joe sees a violent young king who can be made dependent on a larger structure. Marlowe sees teachers standing between him and the things they are teaching. Cheese watches the same process from below. Marlowe has everything Cheese respects. His orders are final. His people fear him. An insult receives an answer. Meetings do not restrain him for long. He can sit silently while an entire room worries about his reaction. Cheese has spent years creating loud demonstrations of toughness. Marlowe possesses the quiet version Cheese has been trying to imitate. Their personalities differ in one decisive way. Marlowe has far more discipline. He waits, studies weaknesses, and delegates violence with care. Cheese is impulsive and emotionally transparent. That difference makes Cheese useful to him. A disciplined predator benefits from a resentful man who believes impulsiveness is strength. The first clear choice happens in Season 5, before Joe's murder. Marlowe announces a $50,000 reward for information about anyone close to Omar. Joe directly tells Cheese that he wants no part of it. Omar has left Baltimore, and Joe wants the old conflict to remain buried. Cheese secretly gives Marlowe Butchie's location and explains Butchie's connection to Omar. He makes the decision without Joe's knowledge and insists that Joe does not need to know. This is the first betrayal. Cheese has begun serving two bosses, and only one of them knows it. Money matters. Marlowe's promised $50,000 is an immediate reward, and Cheese likes rewards that can be displayed. Joe later predicts that if Cheese has that much cash, it will quickly find its way into a salesman's hands. Joe knows his nephew's appetites. The sum explains only part of the risk. Cheese already has access to a major drug organization and enough wealth to make serious bets. The bounty gives him something beyond cash. Marlowe treats his private knowledge as valuable. He invites Cheese into a decision Joe has forbidden. For once, Cheese can feel closer to the decisive boss than to the uncle who keeps correcting him. The result is horrifying. Chris and Snoop torture and murder Butchie to force Omar back onto the street. Joe understands that whoever whispered Butchie's name to Marlowe placed the entire East Side organization in danger. Omar will come for everyone connected to Marlowe, and Joe is now trapped inside a war he tried to avoid. Joe suspects Cheese almost immediately. He tells Slim Charles he will not move against family without proof. He knows his sister's son well enough to predict how the reward will expose him, and he still refuses to act on suspicion. Then he places Cheese in charge while he prepares to disappear and asks Slim to watch him. That may be Joe's fatal mistake. It also tells us exactly what Cheese betrays. Joe's family loyalty remains active while he suspects his nephew has put a target on him. He gives Cheese another chance because kinship means something concrete in Joe's world. Family limits what he is willing to do for self-preservation. Cheese lets ambition overrule that limit. The final opening comes through Hungry Man. During a co-op meeting, Hungry Man accuses Cheese of entering county territory assigned to his people. Cheese responds with insults. Joe shuts the argument down, apologizes for his nephew, and assures the room that Cheese will respect the boundaries. Listen to how that exchange would feel to Cheese. Hungry Man challenges his heart in public. Joe answers for him. Cheese sits in a room full of bosses while his uncle handles him like a child who has misbehaved. Joe is protecting him again, and Cheese experiences the protection as another reminder that he is not the man in charge. Marlowe studies the entire exchange. Soon afterward, Chris and Snoop kidnap Hungry Man, bind him, and deliver him to Cheese. The gift is designed with extraordinary precision. Marlowe gives Cheese the man Joe ordered him to tolerate. He turns Cheese's private resentment into a body on the floor. He lets Cheese feel that under Marlowe, disrespect receives the answer Cheese has always wanted to give. The gift also carries an expectation. Marlowe does not need to explain it in a long speech. Cheese understands. Marlowe has removed Cheese's enemy. Cheese can now remove Marlowe's. This is when Cheese completes the choice. He helps Joe prepare to leave town, waits outside, and leaves his uncle exposed. Marlowe walks into the house with Chris. Joe sees him and immediately understands why Cheese had been so certain that no one needed to worry about Omar. When Joe identifies his nephew as the person who gave him up, Marlowe confirms it with a nod. Joe's last exchange contains both betrayals. He identifies the person who opened the door with two bitter words, my nephew. He calls Cheese a boy who was always a disappointment. Joe turns to the second relationship in the room and tells Marlowe, I treated you like a son. Marlowe answers that he was never made to play the son. Joe has been betrayed by his biological nephew and by the younger boss he tried to mentor. Each man accepts what Joe can provide and rejects the obligation attached to receiving it. The sentence Marlowe speaks about himself also describes Cheese. Neither of them was willing to play the son once taking the father's place became possible. Inheritance without submission guides both men. Marlowe takes Joe's connection, lawyer, business knowledge, and position. Cheese takes territory and authority under the new regime. Joe's attempt to civilize Marlowe gives Marlowe the tools to replace him. Joe's protection of Cheese keeps the betrayer close enough to open the door. Cheese chooses Marlowe because Marlowe validates the qualities Joe spends years trying to manage. Aggression becomes initiative. Resentment becomes intelligence. Disobedience becomes independence. A reckless feud becomes the exact pressure point Marlowe uses to recruit him. He also chooses Marlowe because he misunderstands power. Cheese assumes power belongs to whoever controls the present moment. Joe looks weak after Omar steals the shipment. The co-op looks weak when it debates boundaries. Family looks weak because family requires patience. Marlowe looks permanent because he can kill anyone who creates a problem. Marlowe is never permanent. His reign barely survives Joe. After the murder, Cheese rises quickly. Marlowe takes control of the supply connection and dissolves the co-op's shared authority. He offers Hungry Man's territory to Slim Charles first. Slim declines, saying he is not made to be a chief executive. Cheese accepts immediately. Marlowe places him over East Side distribution and raises the price of the brick. Cheese finally has the visible authority he wanted. The order of Marlowe's offer matters. Slim is the soldier with credibility, judgment, and loyalty. Marlowe recognizes his value before turning to Cheese. Cheese receives the promotion because Slim refuses it. Even after betraying his family, he remains the second choice. This is the tragedy Cheese never understands. He destroys the relationship that made him valuable, and joins a man who values him only as long as he remains useful. Joe tolerates Cheese because he is his sister's son. Marlowe promotes Cheese because he needs an East Side distributor. One bond survives disappointment. The other survives until the organizational chart changes. Cheese mistakes Marlowe's use for respect. The difference becomes sharper when we compare Cheese with Slim. Both men work under Joe. Both know the game can change overnight. Slim has already served Avon, Stringer, and Joe, so loyalty for him does not require staying with one organization forever. He understands succession. He also understands that a person can move through the game without pretending yesterday never happened. Cheese needs to erase yesterday because yesterday contains evidence against the identity he is selling. His uncle protected him. His uncle had the connect before Marlowe. His uncle's methods kept the East Side profitable. Every memory makes Cheese look less self-made. That is why his final speech is so revealing. Marlowe eventually leaves the drug trade under the terms of a legal deal and offers to sell the Greek connection for $10 million. The remaining dealers pool their money. When the group comes up $900,000 short, Cheese volunteers the entire amount. Another dealer asks where he found that kind of money. Cheese boasts that anyone selling heroin and cocaine in Baltimore should be ashamed if they cannot produce it. He has converted betrayal into proof of talent. The money helps him perform the identity he always wanted. Nobody is allowed to ask whose death helped produce his position. Fat-Face Rick reminds him that the group already had the connection under Joe and blames Cheese for siding with Marlowe. Cheese answers by rewriting the story. Joe had his time, he claims, and Omar ended it. Marlowe had his time, and the police ended it. Now their time has arrived. Cheese ended Joe's time. He gave Marlowe the information that brought Omar back, and he later left Joe open to assassination. His final speech assigns the fall to Omar, removing his own choice and turning betrayal into the natural movement of eras. Leaders rise. Leaders fall. Smart men adjust. Cheese places himself outside morality by calling every decision an adaptation to the present. Then he says there is no past in the game, there is no nostalgia, there is only the street and whatever happens today. Finally, he gives the cleanest description of his loyalty. When his uncle held power, he was with his uncle. When Marlowe held power, he was with Marlowe. Now he is ready for whoever comes next. Cheese thinks he is describing flexibility. He is confessing that his loyalty has always belonged to power. Charles shoots him before he can finish. When the others complain that the murder has left them $900,000 short, Slim says that was for Joe. The surrounding dealers call him sentimental and return to the money. In one small exchange, The Wire gives both sides of the game. The business continues, and memory still exists inside the people conducting it. David Simon later described Cheese's fate as a betrayal too far and said Slim retained feeling for one of his former bosses. That explanation matters because Slim's act is not a random burst of audience gratification. Cheese has built his entire survival strategy around the idea that nobody will care about the previous arrangement once the money changes hands. Slim proves that calculation wrong. Cheese understands fear, profit, hierarchy, and immediate advantage. He fails to understand attachment in other men. Joe's attachment protects him for years. Slim's attachment kills him in seconds. There is one more family detail that never becomes explicit in the aired series. David Simon confirmed that Cheese is Randy Wagstaff's biological father. The writers considered referring to that relationship in Season 5 and decided there was not enough room to develop it. The show itself gives Randy and Cheese no scene together, so it would be unfair to invent a history between them. The confirmed connection still adds a quiet ache to Cheese's character. Randy spends Season 4 desperate for an adult who can protect him. His foster mother is burned out of her home, the police fail him, and the group home teaches him to harden himself. Somewhere in the same city, his father works inside one of Baltimore's richest drug organizations, and later sacrifices an uncle who treated him like a son. Cheese stands between two generations of family and protects neither. Joe reaches down toward him, Randy exists below him, Cheese keeps looking upward toward whoever has the strongest name at the moment. That upward gaze defines his character more than greed alone. He wants to be close enough to power that its reputation becomes his. He never develops Joe's patience, Marlowe's discipline, or Slim's credibility. Each of those men possesses a quality that survives the room. Cheese performs strength until a stronger man enters it. His choice of Marlowe therefore begins before the secret conversation about Butchie. It begins every time Joe's restraint feels like weakness to him. It becomes action when Cheese accepts Marlowe's $50,000 and sells information Joe explicitly wants buried. It becomes final when Marlowe delivers Hungry Man and Cheese returns the favor by delivering his uncle. Why does he do it? Money gives him the immediate excuse. Humiliation gives him the emotional push. Ambition gives the betrayal its direction. His deepest motive is the belief that belonging to the winner is the same thing as winning. The series destroys that belief with perfect economy. Joe dies in his own house. Marlowe takes the connection. Cheese gets his promotion. Months later, the police remove Marlowe. The connection goes up for sale. And Cheese has to spend $900,000 helping the surviving dealers buy back the system his uncle already controlled. He murders the foundation beneath him and later pays to stand on a weaker copy of it. Even then, he believes he came out ahead. Cheese chose Marlowe over his family when Marlowe made his resentment feel like strength. He stayed with Marlowe because the new arrangement let him confuse delegated authority with personal greatness. His final mistake was believing everyone else made the same calculation. Slim Charles carried an older debt, one that produced zero profit and offered zero promotion. Cheese had removed the past from his own mind. Slim had kept it alive. That is the final judgment on Cheese Wagstaff. He survives pressure, runs crews, understands the drug trade, and recognizes shifts in power quickly. He is far from stupid. His intelligence serves an empty idea of loyalty. He stands beside whoever appears strongest and calls the decision realism. Every move carries him closer to the top and further from anyone who would protect him when his usefulness ends. For one brief period, Cheese gets exactly what he wants. His uncle is gone. Nobody can correct him. Nobody can answer for him. Nobody can reduce him to his place inside a family. And when Slim raises the gun, nobody is left who loves him enough to intervene.